Welcome to another episode of 11 Warriors Live. I'm joined today by George Eisner, one of our producers at 11 Warriors. Man, George, we are here after a day that feels like it has been years in the making. It has been years in the making. Ohio State finally beating Michigan. 2019 was the last time Ohio up in the game. And then on Saturday, Ohio State knocks off Michigan in Ann Arbor 27-9. George, you're coming out of this game. How are you feeling about an Ohio State win for the first time in 6 years?
I'm ecstatic. I'm happier beyond where order has been restored, good has triumphed over evil, the foul beast in the north has been vanquished, and there's so many interesting little storylines from so many different characters on both sides of this rivalry that have emerged coming out of this result. And it's especially gratifying for us because there's been something of a curse relative to our start at 11 Warriors around this game. We had not seen Ohio State beat Michigan since either of us started working at 11 Warriors. It had some called it the George curse, some called it the Chase curse. In any event, the curse is over, and I'm thrilled. I had to take an emergency flight home from Akron yesterday, just because I had a connecting flight through Chicago O'Hare, and there's obviously massive snowstorms all over the Midwest today. Good luck to your Browns, by the way. And so there's just so many cancellations, but I still got to fly home in my jersey yesterday, and it was probably the only time I've ever or will ever do that. But everybody understood the significance, and I was not even close to the only person that was in a jersey or sporting some sort of Ohio State flair. It was one of the most prideful moments I can remember for this fan base, national championship notwithstanding, within the last half decade or so. It feels it's just so vindicating, and there's so many interesting things to talk about, and I'm thrilled to be able to discuss all of them with you and our fans today on 11 Warriors Live. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I am seeing that we are live in two places right now. Unfortunately, we are live here with a title that Ohio State dominates Michigan and Ann Arbor, and one that says "Welcome to Hate Week." Obviously, if you are watching on the Welcome to Hate Week, we are working on getting that live stream killed so that we can just be in one place for you. But if you
We
are
have
watching in
plenty
two
of hate
places,
left over for Indiana, I would
that
say.
is
So
right.
hate week
Maybe
two,
we're just
electric
transferring
boogaloo.
it over. That's right. That's right. This is Hate Week number two before Ohio State plays the Hoosiers. I got a couple people on our staff helping me out with the launch, but here we are talking about Ohio State's win over Michigan. Before we get into more of what we will talk about on today's show, I do want to give a shout out to the sponsor of everything that we do video wise here at 11 Warriors, and that is First Bank of Central Ohio. 11 Warriors Live is brought to you today by First Bank of Central Ohio. It is the official bank of our company from game day to work day. They are always in our corner, and they can be in your corner too. Give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. You're also going to see on today's broadcast a link popping down at the bottom of your screen. We have a new shirt at 11 Warriors Dry Goods. It says Order Restored. That is the title that is on the thumbnail for the video on YouTube. I'm not sure if that's also showing up on X and Facebook, but we have that shirt for you to purchase with Ohio State's win over Michigan 27-9. All right, let's dive into the game that we got to watch on Saturday. I had a lot of people, let's start here. I had a lot of people who were in my mentions on Twitter who were kind of having a little bit of a hard time dealing with Ohio State's slow start in this game.
Who could have seen it coming?
Who could have seen it coming? Right. There was this idea maybe that Ohio State was going to start fast. Ryan Day did say that they were going to start fast. Now, it was the defense that ended up taking the field first. And all of a sudden, Michigan comes out. They get a couple of chunk yardage plays. Jordan Marshall, the guy who would run his mouth all week about wanting to beat Ohio State, is the one that ends up powering that drive for the Wolverines. But Matt Patricia's defense and the Silver Bullets end up holding their own and forcing Michigan to 3 points. The following drive, Possibly not quite the worst case scenario for Ohio State, but just a rung below. I think the only thing worse that could have happened was Julian Sand throws a pick six. All of a sudden, you're down 10-0, just like you were last year at Penn
Shades of
State.
McCord.
Yeah, but they throw that interception. Ohio State's down 6-0. We're watching Ohio State in that hole. Was there any part of you that was nervous that this game might go the way that the past four games have gone against Michigan? And that has been that Ohio State didn't come out with the right intensity and maybe gets into this rock fight rather than being able to take over with a dominant performance, which obviously we did seeing at the end.
Not at all. I generally I've watched so many football games at this point in my life that I tend, as it applies to my team, as long as the score is close, I don't start to get really nervous until the fourth quarter if they haven't really swung momentum back in their favor yet. And I going into this game, I had shallower expectations for the beginning than just about anybody, which I thought was a little unusual. I my final score prediction was only 21-7, and that wasn't too far off base. I was the only person on staff actually that predicted Ohio State would hold Michigan to within single digits, and that happened by the skin of their teeth. But it's still this was I believe the eighth opponent this year that this defense has held to under 10 points. So it speaks to the historical brilliance of this defense and one of the reasons why I thought they were going to be able to largely corral Michigan. But my bold claim for this game, too, was that I thought the first quarter was going to end 0-0. I expect that didn't end up working out. But my big reason for thinking that was this is the most resilient and talented opponent that Ohio State has faced, I think, by far since the opener in Texas. And we saw how tight that game was. Even though that was a game in which Ohio State never trailed, that game still ended up with a 14-7 final score. And you can chalk up a lot of that to it being the first game of the season for both teams. But that was also a game that Ohio State had the benefit of playing at home. This was the most formidable challenge on the road that Ohio State has had all season other than the Washington game. And if you recall in that game, Ohio State actually trailed for most of the first half before they finally got a 2-minute drill of sorts going prior to halftime and was able to take a 7-3 lead. Ultimately walked out of that game winning 24-6. So I expected this team to turn it on in the second half. I expected a tight first half. I didn't expect as sloppy of a start, I think. But the other game that happened earlier this year that the beginning reminded me of was the Penn State game, in which I believe it was Katron Allen for Penn State had something like a 30 or 40-yard run on the first play of the game for Penn State. And of course, some people were chalking Penn State up to being a wild card and thinking, what kind of version are we going to get? Some people got scared. Eventually, Ohio State went into the halftime of that game up 17-14. Could have been even more if not for an untimely fumble from C.J. Donaldson. So looking at that, and then the Sand throw obviously wasn't great. I started to get a little bit nervous with that, but then the defense showed us why it's been so historically brilliant and kept Michigan not only out of the end zone under both of those circumstances, but did it for the rest of the game as well. This team will be able to beat anybody because of how good the defense is, regardless if they get off to a bad start like that. I think it was a lot of wishful thinking from many Ohio State fans that, the best case scenario for Ohio State is getting off to a fast start and putting Michigan into a throw script right away. I just didn't think that was very realistic. But I think the way that they managed the game, given the way it started, they couldn't have played it any better. And they ended up winning the game, I think, in a fashion that ultimately surprised a lot of people. I'm not sure if you would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I did tweet this out at the beginning of the game, and this is when people were kind of in my mentions talking about Ohio State's slow start. There was even some people who were already jumping on that wagon of we got to fire Ryan Day.
Oh my gosh.
We got to move on from the head coach. But I tweeted out, and this was my take: not too high, not too low. And that was the mindset that Ohio State had all week. They knew that Michigan was going to come out and throw punches, as they always do. We'll talk a little bit later on the broadcast about maybe some of the fights that Michigan started in this game later when it seemed to be in Ohio State's control, and even some that when the game was still in the balance. But it felt like Ohio State, and this was reflected in the way that the players and the coaches talked about it after the game, was don't waver, don't panic. You have possibly had the worst start that you can have in this game, and yet you're down 6-0. Your offense goes down and scores a touchdown, you're up 7-6, and then maybe you don't look back from that point forward. Obviously, we did see Ohio State go down all the way to the goal line. There was that moment with Jason Barham who ended up having a headbutt of the referee, and for in reasons that I don't quite understand, he was not ejected from this game. I know that you had seen a tweet from Terry McCauley, who does some of the rules analysis for Fox, that he had said there was no question that Barham should have been ejected from this game. That did give Ohio State another opportunity, another 4 chances at the end zone, but unfortunately they had a false start penalty that ends up taking them back to where they have to kick a field goal. That 6-3 score then kind of kept a little bit of those nerves around, but eventually Ohio State put that thing in cruise control behind an incredible performance from Julian Sand. And Bo Jackson looked really good in this game. I thought Ohio State having Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith back into the fold also did wonders for the offense. And as you mentioned, this defense, it just never seems to have, it never seems to really look like it's in any danger. Even when you're thinking, oh man, maybe this offense is about to get to them, they solidify themselves and they get the stop. That stop that we had really been looking for Jim Knowles' defenses to get for 3 years when he was here. Eventually, Ohio State did get them in that playoff run, but Matt Patricia's defense, if you need a stop, he's getting that stop. And so I thought that they really responded well when they were down in that 6-0 hole. And then even when Michigan kept coming around with those drives that eventually stalled out, I think Ohio State responded really well.
I believe this, now that we're at the end of the regular season, this defense gave up 1 touchdown in the first half, I think, all year. Is that right? I think it was the Penn State game, and that's it.
It was just Penn State. Yep, 2 touchdowns in that game.
It's unbelievable. I mean, there's enough talent. I mean, you see why this team has been number 1 since after the first couple of weeks in the season for as long as it has been, and frankly is, I think, head and shoulders above pretty much everyone else in college football. There's a case to be made, and their legacy still has to be written. But coming out of the game last night, I think it was already safe to start asking the question, is this the best Ohio State defense of the last 50 years and possibly ever? Now, across the board, you could probably make cases that there's been some more talent on teams like the 2002 team. I'm not going to pretend to be someone that can rattle off names from like the 1975-77 squads, but I think that you would be very hard pressed, I think, to make an argument that this isn't one of, if not the best linebacking core we've ever seen for Ohio State, that this isn't just the all around the best unit that we've seen. 8 games in 12 regular season contests where they limit the opponent to less than 10 points, where they hold the opponent to single digits. 5 games, nearly half of the schedule, where they don't allow the opponent to get in the end zone, including against Michigan in both cases. They showed the graphic at the end of the game yesterday that this is the first team to hold all 12 of their regular season opponents since the 1975 Florida Gators to 17 or less points. They're the first Ohio State team to do that in at least the last 50 years, if not ever. There's just not enough praise you can put on this defense right now. I think that a lot of the way that they will be remembered largely falls on, is this team going to be successful in defending their national title? That being said, if this team for whatever reason doesn't go all the way again this year, I have a very, very difficult time believing it's going to be because any mistakes made by the defense. I talk about all the time how spoiled we are as Ohio State fans in more respects than one. This is probably the most brilliant example of that I can remember. This defense is so good, and even as we've watched it week in and week out this year, I'm not sure how many people even realize just how historically brilliant this unit is. And given the context that they lost something like 8 players to the NFL draft last year, their defensive coordinator jumped ship to go across what used to be the division, but still is the conference of the Big Ten, to not a rival in Penn State, and doesn't have a great follow-up campaign there. They replace him with somebody that has no college defensive coordinator experience and has been out of coaching football in any capacity for at least a year, if not, I can't remember what Patricia's layoff was between the Lions and the Buckeyes, but it was an out of the box hire in some respects, and one that had an understandable amount of skepticism attached to it. Now, I don't know if there's any question that Patricia is not only the best defensive coordinator in college football, he might be the best coordinator, period, with how this unit has played this year, and one that deserves to be the highest paid coordinator. One that I hope Ohio State. I don't know what Patricia's ambitions are in terms of, does he want to get back to the NFL? It seems like he's very, very happy being in a position where he can educate and shape the minds of young men in this role at Ohio State. It seems like his family's happy here. I hope his family has some sort of attachment to Ohio State that maybe would keep him here for multiple years. I think it's probably going to be hard to quell a lot of the noise trying to draw him out of Columbus coming into this offseason. But how could you want anybody else to stick around Columbus after what you just saw, not only yesterday, but the rest of this regular season? This defense, I hope people start to open their eyes, not only within the fan base, and many already recognize it, but on a national level, for all the conversation there is around Sayin and Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, the star of this Ohio State team is this collective defense. And if they are able to defend their national championship, it will be because of efforts like we saw yesterday.
Yeah, and let me just add this on Matt Patricia. His defensive performance in the second half, the way that his players were moving around with physicality and with dominance is something that I don't know if I've seen from an Ohio State defense. And I've been watching Ohio State football a long time, certainly not as long as some of the people who might be watching this video. But just get a look at some of these numbers that Chris Lauterbach posted over on our website about Michigan's scoreless second half. This is what Ohio State's defense was able to do to Michigan's offense. Michigan only had 6.5 minutes of possession. They had 39 total yards. They got 3 first downs, 2.2 yards per play. They had 5 carries for -8 yards. 5 of 13 passing from Bryce Underwood for 47 yards and a pick. They were 0 for 4 on third down. They were 0 for 1 on fourth down. They had 13 total yards on the final 17 plays of the game. This was a masterclass, yet again, from Matt Patricia. And it was what gave me so much confidence going into this game, and I know that you felt similarly, was that Matt Patricia has spent almost his entire career game planning for NFL quarterbacks. The most prestigious of those quarterbacks was Tom Brady. Every day in practice, he would practice against a player that many consider to be the greatest player in NFL history. And so now you're giving him a full week. And if we're talking about this rivalry as being the greatest in all of sports, I imagine that Matt Patricia has been coming up with this game plan, not just for this week, but for the whole year, for an 18-year-old freshman. And he made Bryce Underwood see ghosts yesterday. He made the Michigan offense see a group of 11 players who were flying around on the field. And Sonny Styles had said after the game that it felt like Matt Patricia had prepared them so well that they were all on their toes. Every player that was on the field was anticipating rather than reacting. And it led to an event where, and we have to talk about this, Brutus ended up spending more time in the end zone than Michigan's offense did on Saturday. This is is this one of the greatest mascot moments that we have seen? Is an Ohio State mascot, Brutus, one of the most legendary mascots in the sport, doing a script Ohio right near the Michigan goal line and then crossing out the Michigan M. There was so much snow on the field that it gave him this opportunity, and Brutus took full advantage. I had a lot of fun watching him do it. Dan Hope was actually one of the first people, I think, to spot it, and then there ended up being so many different camera angles that Fox ended up being able to post. But man, that is an all-time move from Brutus in this matchup. I definitely think that it could be up there.
There's so many little elements of that action that are going to immortalize it, and it's already on its way to being received as such. Not only it's one thing for us as Ohio State fans to gas up the behavior of our own mascot, but you go on social media right now and there's still people outside of Ohio State's fan base talking about it like that's one of the most creative and brilliant things that they've ever seen a mascot do. I The thing about it that's particularly sweet for me is there is no a lot of people were wondering what's Ohio State's answer to the flag planting from last year going to be. Flag planting it's almost a cliche at this point. And I know people are going to say, oh, you're just sour about it because not only are you dealing with it from Michigan, but Baker Mayfield did it to you when he was at Oklahoma. Ohio State's been a victim of flag planting at midfield after a home loss for a very long time. But there's something specifically creative about what Brutus did yesterday, particularly from the notion that Michigan can't answer that because they don't have a mascot. Wolverines are extinct
Yeah.
in the state of Michigan. There's no way that they can answer that. They cannot deface Ohio State's field the way that Brutus did the snow graffiti on Michigan's end zone yesterday. And the fact that it went unnoticed for as long as it did until I love the way that Fox not only filmed Brutus getting it, but then also the Michigan grounds crew frustratingly, furiously trying to scrub it away.
Furiously,
Like,
yes.
how did we let that sit on our field for as long as we did? But using the elements of nature to just kind of sneak it on there, and there weren't any like trace footprints ruining it or anything. You saw him do the calculated hop to get the I dotted so that the cursive for the script Ohio would be perfectly in place, the M perfectly crossed out in the stuff. Every little bit about that was perfect. And there's so many things that mascots do that I think just by and large are, as frankly cliche as the flag planting. I always hate when they do these little scripted fights between the team because they're always Ohio Bobcat notwithstanding, these are always predetermined agreements in terms of how hard are we going to go after each other, and they're kind of cliche. That was just a raw moment of creativity from Brutus Buckeye, and it was you can see the way that it is being received across the college football universe. That is going to go down as one of the greatest moments in this, something up there with tearing down the banner in terms of a creative moment of humiliating your rival on their own field. That is going to go down as one of the greatest moments in this rivalry, I think, that doesn't explicitly have to do with anybody on the Ohio State football team or coaching staff. One of the many, many great things that happened yesterday, but I think certainly that, above all else, is probably the one that we're going to remember the most, I think, from this game. Just because you're going to see those pictures time and time again, constantly played across many, many iterations of the game to come. I don't know the name of the person that actually plays Brutus Buckeye for Ohio State out the top of my hat, but I have to tip my cap to that guy because that is something that will be remembered for many, many years. Probably the greatest Brutus moment ever, if I'm being totally honest.
And I got to bring this up too. You tip your cap to Brutus. I do as well. I also tip my cap to Ohio State's creative team because this right here might be one of the best graphics I have ever seen. Not only
The
is that
photo
picture
itself was
right,
incredible
exactly
before they
right.
made it edit to it.
Not only is that picture great of Carnell Tate, but to have the wherewithal, the presence of mind to take advantage of this opportunity to edit and to create this image of Carnell Tate wearing gold pants is fantastic. So I think that not only was Ohio State's performance on the field spectacular on Saturday, but I think that Ohio State program wide, man, it was on firing on all cylinders. And in a way, it just kind of felt like it was this. I know that last year wasn't perfect for Ohio State. I know that Ohio State fans much rather would
That's
have
putting it
watched.
politely.
Correct. I know Ohio State would have, the fans would have most certainly have wanted Ohio State to win that game last year. But to know that it had been 3 years to that point, and then you tack on this unexplainable loss in 2024, for now Ohio State's team to respond the way that it did in this game, it feels like the perfect storm. It feels like it unlocks some things for this program to where not only are we seeing a team that's at its best, but we're just seeing a program that's at its best. And there are just pictures from this game as well that I find to be incredible. You get this picture here of Matt Patricia cheering on Sonny Styles in this game. Matt Patricia, again, we talked about him being at his best. Here he is with Tim Walton celebrating. The look on some of these guys' faces, you can just see how much it meant for these players and for these coaches to finally get this win. The celebration afterwards, Ohio State, they did not plant the flag in this game. There was some funny stuff going on too of Michigan's players defending the M from Ohio State's players because they didn't want Ohio State to retaliate with their flag planting.
And I gotta say, for Day to go up to Moore and say, if you don't want a problem, then we need to get everybody off the field right now. For him, that's a big brother move to say, I'm telling you right now, like, I'm trying to be respectful, but if you really don't want problems, we need to make moves as coaches to get everybody on. That's a very big brother, little brother move right there, and very, very classy move as well, I thought, from Day too, in terms of winning with humility. That's a good way to go about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about that as we move forward here, because I think that Ohio State, the way that they handled everything post game, I thought also was a testament to the program that Ryan Day has built. The whole win with humility thing. I loved how he approached his post game press conference with him immediately coming in and saying that, you know, he takes no credit from this. He really just enjoys watching his players and his coaches and the members of his program that have worked so hard for this victory. And then when he wants to turn it to himself, he can't even get there. He had said that he had thought for a long time, as you can imagine, what he would say in this post-game press conference. And we can fill in the context as fans, right? Going all the way back to 2021 when Jim Harbaugh said that he was born on third base, when there's Michigan players who are questioning the toughness of his program, when Sharon Moore is kind of running his mouth about Michigan getting a win in 2024. Like, there are plenty of things that we could have seen and heard Ryan Day say in that post-game press conference that would have mirrored the incredible greatness of I'd like to know where Lou Holtz is right now. But when it finally got to the moment of him being able to take, I guess, this satisfaction in beating Michigan for the first time in years, he just kind of sat there and his choice was to take the high road. His choice was, I'm going to win with humility. I'm going to turn the attention back to my players who have worked so hard, because he even then goes on to say later in the press conference, it's not about him. It's not about raising trophies. It's not about winning. To be a head coach, it's about those players, and it's about building them up and turning them into great players, but also great men, great future fathers. It was a proud moment for me to hear Ryan Day talk more about that stuff than to use the opportunity and the platform to fire some shot at Michigan, knowing that you had just dominated them on the field for 4 quarters. And so he let the play do the talking. And I think that that is something that I respect him a lot for, and certainly something that I think Ohio State fans have taken a lot of pride in today.
It's funny that you started off this show with the, relative to how to feel about the start of this game, and that you invoked not too high, not too low, just being right in the middle. Because it's one of the things that my own father has tried to instill upon me and my brother in raising us. And another one that he's talked about relative to sports is you win with dignity and you lose with grace. And so it was funny to me seeing that as a big theme of yesterday relative to how Ryan Day conducted himself. You compare what happened yesterday to what happened last year. You could tell that last year was a win for Michigan that, given the down year that they had in defending their own national title, that was really that was their Super Bowl, frankly. Like, they needed that win to galvanize their program, and they ended up having a good bowl win over Alabama as well that I think not maybe a lot of people expected. But that win clearly salvaged their season, and they were willing to let anybody and everybody know about it, that they felt like they were back and that they got one over on their rival, who otherwise was probably going to go on to the Big Ten championship and who knows what else at that point. And they let everybody know about it, and there was no winning with humility, which was why it was funny that there were some people that were upset about the way that Ohio State handled it yesterday relative to how Michigan handled it last season, and potentially in other seasons prior to that. I, I what Day had the opportunity to say whatever he wanted yesterday. He earned the FaceTime, and that's what great coaches do, is that they give all the credit to their players and their coaching staff. And it spoke to the fact that, in terms of me invoking last year's game, that was the most important thing for Michigan to pull off. It was important for Ohio State to get this done, but this team clearly has goals that go beyond just this rivalry, as near and dear as it is to all of our hearts. And it's great for them that they can check this box. But now they have arguably the most important game of their entire season to this point next year, or next week. They've talked about how eager they are. The thing with all these losses to Michigan in recent seasons is that it has kept them in several circumstances from going and advancing to the Big Ten championship game. And so they have talked about how winning this game was important in terms of them being able to go back to Lucas Oil Stadium for the first time since, I believe, 2020, in order to win a Big Ten conference championship. And so they've already got a game that I know that they've been looking forward to, and another wrong they've been looking to right next week, and then obviously all the CFP. So this is the way the Day handled everything yesterday. I think was an appropriate way to celebrate the success that they've been waiting to rectify for a very long time, but also keep everyone's head on right in terms of, let's enjoy this for the time being, and then next week it's right back to work, because we have much, much bigger goals and ambitions that go just beyond beating our rival. I don't think he could have handled it any better, frankly. I was very, very impressed with the way that Day not only got the win yesterday, but then everything that happened in the wake of that. He handled himself like an absolute professional, and it was wonderful to see.
Yeah, and this team, they have a story to be told, is what Caden Curry said after the game, and that was kind of the rallying cry of the 2024 team, was that they didn't want their story to be forgotten because of this loss to Michigan. And now a win over Michigan this year gives Ohio State the opportunity to tell their story with a Big Ten championship, potentially another national championship. This team has the goal to be the first Ohio State team to win back-to-back national titles. And unfortunately, this team's story will not be remembered by nationally, or by national media, by the national college football fan, if it doesn't end in a national championship. There are Ohio State fans who we will always be able to remember Ohio State beating Michigan for the first time in 6 years, and that is a significant win, and we finally got that Michigan monkey off of our backs. But from the national perspective, this team needs to win a national championship for it to be remembered as one of the greatest ever, or it will end up on one of those articles that gets posted every summer. What are the best college football teams to never win a national championship? And I know that Ohio State's coaches and players want to be a part of the greatest ever and not the greatest almost ever. And so I think that is a very big motivating factor for Ohio State as they approach not only this week when they play against Indiana in the Big Ten championship game, but also the college football playoff. Here we are 33 minutes in. I feel like we've talked about a lot, but still we haven't really addressed everything that we could get into in this game. And I've had fun talking to you, George. This feels like what Ohio State fans, that's probably the conversations that they were having all last night, sharing over a drink of some kind.
Oh, yeah.
Where our conversation is bouncing all the kinds of different directions, from Matt Patricia to Ryan Day to Brutus to the players. But I do want to kind of focus in our conversation a little bit on a couple of questions, because I think they are ones that are important to ask. Maybe just one in particular, actually, before we get to our fans' questions. And that is, now that Ryan Day has thrown that Michigan monkey off of his back, is he the number one coach in college football? Are you comfortable making that claim?
Not yet. I still think it's Kirby Smart, and I selfishly wanted to see Ohio State play Georgia in the national championship last year instead of Notre Dame because I wanted Day to have the opportunity to right another wrong, not only the one that they were having against Michigan, but then also the head-to-head question of Smart versus Day after that heartbreaking loss that Ohio State had after having such a massive lead against Georgia in the college football playoff semifinal with another team that, you just talked about these teams that are lost to history in terms of ones that have never one that didn't end up winning a national championship despite how talented they were. I not only had to deal with that when I was a senior at Ohio State because that was the 2015 team that brought back that was defending its own national title, but then also the whole C.J. Stroud era with the kinds of careers that Olave and Garrett Wilson and now Jackson Smith and Jigba are having in the NFL. You look at that passing attack and you just wonder how did that team never end up getting a national title? And it was largely because of Michigan, but more specifically, it was because of Georgia. And I think Smart having the multiple national titles on his resume, Day's got the one, but I think that he's going to you're if you want to beat the king, frankly, you got to kill the king, and you have to overcome them in a direct competitive fashion. I think to firmly cement yourself atop that play. I don't think there's a question that Day is one of the most desirable coaches to have for your program in college football. And at that point, when you're getting to that conversation around the top 3, 5 names, you're basically splitting hairs because there's only one team that can win the title every year, and it's not like we're not in the Nick Saban era anymore where you've got one team that's just ripping off multiple dynasties and then there's everybody else left in the wake. But Georgia's still a program that recently has multiple national titles to its name. Ohio State, we've got one each decade for the last 3, but Day still has not won multiple of his own yet. I think Smart is the last person that he has to overcome at this point. That being said, the biggest monkey that Day had on his back, and the one that critics used to throw at him most feverishly in those discussions, has been done away with after this result. So I think he has firmly cemented himself as one of the top 3, in my mind, top 2 coaches in college football. The only person left yet is Kirby Smart for him to overcome. And given Georgia's position, where they'll be playing in the SEC championship next week, if they win that, they're going to be one of the top 4 teams in the CFP. We could be on a collision course for that very rematch and an answer to that question, I think, in the coming months here. So I think that once Day finally beats Kirby Smart in direct competition, that'll be the time where we can say this guy is definitively the best head coach in college football. But there's no shame in being number 2 at this moment, I don't think.
Yeah. I can't say I agree. I can't say I disagree. I think I'm kind of in a place where I can certainly respect that opinion that you just brought forth. Let me play the opposite side, though, for the sake of arguing Ryan Day as the number 1 coach in college football. Since he's taken over as Ohio State's head coach in 2019, he has made the college football playoff in 2019, 2020, 2022, 24, and they will make it again in 25. He made the national championship game in 2020 and 2024, winning one of them, losing one to an Alabama team that I think many would consider to be the greatest, one of the greatest that we have ever seen in the sport. They are what? Scoop and score call, Sean Wade targeting ejection away from making the national championship in 2019. I don't want to deal in hypotheticals here. I'm just saying for the sake of the argument that they were close to making that national championship in 2019. In 2022, that last second field goal by Noah Ruggles, which I don't mean to open up any wounds and scars for Ohio State fans who are watching this broadcast. I know that it was difficult to stomach, certainly as the ball was dropping in New York at the same time that kick goes wide left of the uprights. But they are that field goal away from facing a TCU team that I think many would agree Ohio State would have handled just as easily as Georgia did. Then 2023, they're a win away from the college football playoff. 2024, they obviously win the national championship, and now they have the chance to win another championship. Because if we were picking a team to win, I would choose Ohio State over the field as it currently stands. They're going to play the number 2 team in the country in Indiana on Saturday. Texas A&M just lost to a Texas team that has 3 losses, one of them being to Ohio State. They could potentially be a playoff team. We'll see how the committee handles that next weekend. Then we have teams like Texas Tech, we have Georgia, we have Oregon, we have BYU is in the mix there, Alabama will be in the mix. But if I'm picking Ohio State or the field, I would pick Ohio State to win the national championship at this point. I also will point out this fact for Ryan Day's favor. Since losing to Michigan last year, Ryan Day is 16-0. He is 7-0 versus ranked teams. He is 4-0 versus top 5 teams, 5-0 versus top 10 teams, and that includes the national championship. He has been on a heater, unlike any other heater that we have seen from a college football coach today. And so for me, if I'm picking between him and Kirby Smart currently, I would probably pick Ryan Day. I think that if there's a national championship that happens at the end of this season, that is a definitive choice and probably should be a unanimous choice across the board, maybe save for some of the people who are living down south in SEC country. Another thing I will add on the end of it too, I think the way that Ryan Day has run his program deserves a little bit of credit in this conversation as well, because there is nothing that you hear out of Ryan Day's programs about players having bad behavioral issues, players getting in trouble with the law, players having anything happen that gets into the news. I haven't had to write a headline about an Ohio State player getting in trouble for a very long time. However, how often do we see these posts come out about Georgia players driving recklessly, getting in trouble with the law? There's a certain handle that Ryan Day has over the program that I think deserves at least some credit. The on-field performance, you can argue between the two of them, but I think that it's very clear that Ryan Day runs a tight ship with his program and that his players have the utmost respect for him as a coach. And so I think that also gives him a rung up on Smart in my mind. And you do also, in some ways, have to include Dabo Swinney in the conversation if you're only using championships as your
all right. Let's not get totally crazy here.
I'm not trying to go too far off the rails, but if we are using national championships, those are the 2 that have multiple head coaches. Those are the other 2 that have active coaches that have national titles. And so that's always the argument when you're getting into the championships is it's very clear that Clemson's program has taken a nosedive since 2020, but Dabo Swinney does have those 2 championships that establish him as one of the sports elite coaches. And so even without that second title, I would clearly say that Ryan Day is head and shoulders above Dabo Swinney at the current moment. And I think he is neck and neck with Kirby Smart at the top of the sport.
Yeah, I mean, I think Swinney's stock has taken a dramatic hit over the last 4 seasons. I mean, they barely snuck into the playoff last year. Frankly, they needed some magical stuff to happen against SMU. Was it SMU? I think, or they needed something surrounding SMU to work out last year for them to get in the back door of the playoff as one of the last seeds. And by that token, they needed an expanded playoff to get into the playoff to begin with. But so did Ohio State, I guess, to be fair. That being said, I don't really factor Swinney in at this point. I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, certainly it's probably between him and Kirby Smart. I do think if we're going to open the net a little bit here, there is something to be said too about the programs that the 2 of them inherited. Georgia, frankly, was not near. They had a few decent teams, but they were never the perennial powerhouse that they were before Kirby Smart got there, relative to the rest of the modern era SEC. And I think that he inherited much less than what Day did. I mean, they literally directly invoked the analogy of Urban Meyer passing over the sticks to Ryan Day when Ryan Day took the job. So there was, I think you can say that there was a lot more infrastructure that Day, and hey, the born on third base thing is dead. All right. I am not invoking that in anything whatsoever. I'm not saying that's who Ryan Day is, but strictly in the conversation of which one of those guys is ahead of the other one at this point, I think you would be hard-pressed to argue that Kirby hasn't done more with the situation that he got than what Day did just because of the place Ohio State's program was in prior to when he started as head coach. And again, I probably at this point, again, I talked up the defense the whole first part of this show. If they don't win the national championship this year, it is not going to be because of the defense. The defense has proven
Yeah.
beyond a shadow of a doubt that it is one of the best units, not only possibly in Ohio State history, but in college football history, and they still have their legacy to write. I probably, by that token, I think I would pick them to win the national championship too, going into the postseason. But I'm just being cautious, and I'll believe it when I see it. I think even if they don't end up having to beat Georgia on their way to winning a national title, if Day does get another one, probably strictly on the basis of recency bias, you would still probably have to anoint Day above Smart at that point. I would just like to see the two of them play each other directly and Day to triumph over Smart so you can definitively say one has surpassed the other. And then I think there's not even a conversation like this. But I appreciate you, taking the more optimistic side as an Ohio State fan while I play devil's advocate.
Okay, well, that could be a conversation. I'm sure we could have our own 1 hour live show on about where Ryan Day stands among college football coaches. But I do want to spend the last few moments of this live show addressing some of our fan questions. Have some already preloaded from our forum, but I would encourage anyone who's watching on YouTube or on Facebook to drop some questions in there as well. We will try to get to them as they come in live. But I do want to ask you about, and this sets the stage well for next week. Our first question that came in the forum from EarthPig was, how do you think the Indiana game plays out? Additionally, it appears that the team members were able to complete the Michigan game without any injuries. So is Ohio State going to be at full strength for the game? It looks like it. How do we see the game against Indiana playing out?
I've still got to look into it more. I mean, much in the same way that I'm sure Day probably told his players, it's the same way that they approach things in the NFL, right? It's like, take tomorrow to celebrate, or take the rest of the day to celebrate, and then it's on to business next week, particularly after Ohio State had some travel issues late last night getting back to Columbus.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't know if that's like a scoop or anything. I don't think it is, but Ohio State spent a significant amount of time at the stadium waiting for transport to the airport in Ann Arbor yesterday, and then also spent more than 3 hours waiting on the tarmac to take off because of the inclement weather that was in the Midwest. George, I know you mentioned at the beginning of the show that you had some weather caused some issues getting back home for you, and then obviously that then transferred over to Ohio State trying to leave from Ann Arbor. It was just the snow and the wind and the weather just made it where Ohio State couldn't even get home till early Sunday morning. So I'm sure that the prep on Indiana is just now beginning as guys have gotten out of bed and been able to rest after a well-fought win.
Yeah, exactly. So I've still got to put a lot of my own work in terms of assessing how I think the game is going to play out. So it's hard for me to say at this juncture. I will say that there's a narrative that I've already seen coming into this game that Indiana is the better team in terms of the offensive line play. I'm sure overall defensively you have to give it to Ohio State. And by that token, I think it's probably realistic that Mendoza has more than the typical success that teams this season have had against Ohio State's defense. But we're coming off of the biggest question mark going into this game that we didn't even really talk about was, and a lot of people, they wanted to see Ohio State lean on Smith and Tate in terms of airing the ball out and not trying to plug a square peg into a round hole relative to forcing the issue on the ground. And the ground game ended up being the biggest reason that they dominated time of possession so thoroughly yesterday. We're coming off what was far and away the most impressive performance the offensive line for Ohio State has had this season. And that alone makes me feel extremely confident that going into a place like Lucas Oil, where we have seen this team put on some of its best performances under conference championship circumstances in a controlled environment away from the elements, they put on a show on that turf in Lucas Oil in Indianapolis. Given what they just showed in the most recent game, I have to feel very encouraged that they're going to play extremely well against Indiana's defense next week, given what the offensive line showed us. I feel pretty confident that Ohio State gets it done. I just don't know at this point specifics in terms of how I see that playing out and which way they'll probably lean more heavily on. But I don't know how you can't feel extremely encouraged as a Buckeye fan after the biggest question mark Ohio State had yesterday ended up being arguably the key reason that they dominated Michigan so thoroughly.
Yeah, here's what it comes down to for me. When Ohio State plays Indiana, and this was the case last year, I believe, being the defining factor for an Ohio State win, which looked like a pretty dominant Ohio State win from start to finish. It's about depth for me. That's where I would start beginning your week if you're an Ohio State fan looking at this Indiana team. They are phenomenal. They are the number 2 team in the country. They've been a buzzsaw running through whatever opponent stands in their way. However, if you were to look at the 24/7 talent composite, that's where I recommend you begin your research. Just go to that website. You'll see that Ohio State has 11 5 stars and 56 4 stars on their roster. They are the number 3 team in the talent composite. Indiana is the 72nd team in the talent composite. They have 7 4 stars and 55 3 stars on their team, and the rest is made up by players that don't have either of those rankings. They would be below a 3 star. They would be a not ranked prospect coming out of high school. So Ohio State is able to exercise more depth in this game, which becomes crucial when you consider that Ohio State, even though they didn't have injuries coming out of this game that we know of, as this, as our friend in the comments section asked, we know that this Ohio State team has depth that, hey, if your 5-star player gets hurt, you have another 4-star that you can throw in right behind them, and a 4-star that's been tested this season because Ohio State's been able to play that depth frequently. Indiana has as well, but just the talent gap there, I think, is a significant difference that's going to make this game favorable for Ohio State. They are 5.5-point favorites opening against Indiana in Indianapolis. 5.5 points in favor of the Buckeyes. Move on to this question, talking about, this is just a funny one, I guess, to address in passing. How bad is inflation when $12 million only gets you Bryce Underwood from Jedcat? I like that
$2 million per completion for Michigan yesterday.
There you go. A question from Seattle Linga, one of our moderators. What day of the week did Ryan Day know that both Carnell and Jeremiah were going to suit up? I can answer this question. I feel pretty confident that Ryan Day didn't know until Saturday night that Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate were going to play. I understand the smokescreen that Ryan Day may have been putting on about we're waiting to see these guys practice hard, that they're going to, give us their best effort. They're working really hard to get back on the field. But Ryan Day said after the game on Saturday that Jeremiah Smith was very, very limited in practice this week. And so for him to then have the performance that he did on those limited reps was something that Ryan Day praised him for. And I think Carnell Tate being out there on Saturday and giving it his all was also indicative of someone that has been battling an injury for a few weeks, but now is finally getting back to 100% after spending that much time on the sidelines. This is one that we have to get to before we get out of here. The question, I don't have an answer for it. We can theorize all about it that we want, but what the heck was up with the helmet comm issues on Ohio State's sidelines? There was some stuff that came out about the power going out on Ohio State's sidelines, which cut out the communication system between the coaches and Julian Sand. I don't know if it ended up also impacting the coach-to-coach communication. I'm assuming it probably did. But we have several questions, not only in our forum, but also in our live stream from Facebook and YouTube about the helmet comm stuff. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if you've seen anything, George, that would maybe provide some answers, but it just all kind of seems weird to me.
It's an interesting situation because it would be one thing if this was just us noticing this relative to pretty much any other opponent that doesn't have the history of circumnavigating the rules, so to speak, that we know Michigan does. Maybe they didn't get punished for it, but the NCAA came out and said that Michigan not only cheated, given the sign stealing scandal, but cheated in a way that impacted the game and served to benefit them, despite the fact that they didn't really get a tangible punishment for what they actually did. So they have a documented recent history of cheating to give themselves a competitive advantage. And so they lose the benefit of the doubt in this discussion, even when you don't have concrete evidence catching them red-handed that something went awry there. I thought it was very interesting. There were so many times yesterday on the Fox broadcast where you saw Julian Sand running over the sideline and you were wondering, like, is he hurt? Are they, maybe they're not confident? Maybe they're going to sneak it here and put Keenholz in because that sneak on the goal line didn't well for him. Or is that Keenholz Tebow package about to come in? And no, it was just him going over to get the play directly from the coach and then coming back over to the huddle. Frankly, they managed that situation, I think, extremely well, and I think it's a testament to the team and saying that they didn't allow that circumstance to affect their composure. But the most interesting thing about this element, I think, is no, we haven't really had a follow up. We don't know one way or the other, and I hope that maybe we get some questions answered about what happened in that this doesn't just get lost in the annals of history. But the interesting thing about this is there is a rule, and I asked about this openly to our staff yesterday in wake of the game. There's a rule in the NFL where, in the event that one team loses its ability to utilize the radio equipment, the other team is informed of this and then is obligated to deactivate theirs because the NFL recognizes there is a competitive advantage. We have only just seen, in wake of the Stalions scandal, college teams start to use that same radio equipment. And so you wonder if the same rule that applies to the NFL in terms of competitive balance is also in place in college football. And if it isn't, I bet all those lawyer types at Michigan went to the Michigan people and said, if you disable, if somehow Ohio State's radio communications equipment were to fail, you're not obligated to turn off your own. And that might be something that could potentially help aid them in a comeback. So the conspiracy theorist in me, my head is already running wild what potentially happened there. We don't have anything to catch them red-handed. At the end of the day, they won the game, or Ohio State still won and frankly dominated. So it's not anything to get super worked up about. But where there's smoke, there's fire. And this team and Michigan does not deserve the benefit of the doubt in this situation. I don't think it's entirely far-fetched that something weird happened yesterday. We need to figure out if Michigan was obligated to also turn theirs off once they became aware that Ohio State's own sideline was malfunctioning.
Yeah, and there's questions
I don't know
well
if you
agree. There's questions about like what can be done after this point. I don't know if Ohio State's going to try and pursue any sort of action from the Big Ten to provide an answer about what actually occurred. It seems like this is something that Ohio State won the game by 18 points. Do they really need an answer? Maybe it's something that some of the support staffers can work on in the background just to get a clear answer.
Patetti, if you're mad at for killing the equity deal, this would be a great thing to hit them over the head over. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah. We, I think, are seeing, though, with Ohio State, again, that goes back to just they're not going to waver. They're not going to panic when things happen or don't go their way. And this is an example of one of those things. Not only can stuff on the field cause teams to spiral, it can be something as inconvenient as a helmet-to-helmet communication system going down. And Ohio State managed that situation extremely well. Julian Sain talked about that after the game, about him almost feeling like he was back in high school, where his high school, they used the hand signals, but then they would also, in some instances, would run over to the sideline. He would, to get the play call from his coach, and then he would communicate that to his teammates, and then they would go run the play. And so I would probably bet that Ohio State has never practiced something like that, because you are not expecting that your helmet communication systems are going to go down. But Ohio State, in the middle of a heated rivalry game, when you haven't beaten that rival in a long time, was able to navigate those unforeseen circumstances about as good as you could. And it did help that most of the play calls in that second half, to address a couple more questions from our forum, were just run it down Michigan's throat. That second half, George, it reminded me a lot of 2021 Ohio State versus Michigan, but the teams were flipped. It felt like in 2021, maybe it was just the snow coming down in Ann Arbor, but that year, Hassan Haskins was able to get whatever he wanted behind a Michigan offensive line that was dominating Ohio State's defensive front. And it felt like that exact scenario had flipped on Saturday, where Ohio State was the more physical, the more aggressive, the more dominant team in the second half, imposing its will on Michigan. The drive that stands out the most, this might be one of the most memorable drives of this game to me, and somehow it only ended in 3 points for Ohio State, was a drive that goes 20 plays. It goes 81 yards, and it takes off 12 minutes from the clock. That is how effective Ohio State was on the ground in the second half. And that was one drive of a few where Ohio State pounded the rock and Bo Jackson kept getting handoffs. And Ohio State's run game just salted away this victory in the snow in Ann Arbor. It was incredibly fun to watch. That just seems like a moment that you can cling to from this game as Ohio State, as kind of a microcosm of the game at large, of Ohio State just choking the life out of Michigan and coming away with a win. I don't know how you felt about it, but that was certainly how I come away thinking about that drive being a defining moment of this game for the Buckeyes.
I think on a very broad level, anytime that you have the ball for that long and you are imposing your will on the opponent like that and you only come away with 3 points, it ends up kind of being more of a win for the defense than it does for the offense, because it didn't definitively put Michigan away at that point. But by that time, it was evident that Michigan was playing in a throw script that they didn't have the talent to support. The weather was already not going in their direction. That game salted away certainly a lot of the second half, and I think significantly lowered Michigan's chances to win. It's great to see them impose their will about that. But again, I want to see a team come away with a touchdown under those circumstances. So in that sense, it kind of ended a little bit frustratingly for me. You just think like, man, if they had really, you put that ball in the end zone under those circumstances, you've completely demoralized them. So I don't probably look back on it as fondly as some people do. I think it's kind of silly, frankly, to immortalize a drive that only ends in a field goal. But given all the other circumstances surrounding it in terms of how long and how many plays, it was undoubtedly one of the key reasons in the second half that they were able to put the team away, even if it didn't end with, I think the appropriate fashion that you wanted to. My favorite. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, to me, as long as you come away with points, that's the win in my mind.
Yeah.
I also think it's just the mindset of Michigan knew you were going to run the football, and it did not matter.
And it didn't matter, yeah.
The snow was coming down. The wind was so strong that Ohio State at this point was leading 24-9. Their objective, their goal was to take off as much clock as possible and to take off almost an entire quarter of clock while running the football. And the other team knows that you're going to run the football. All the while you're dealing with a helmet communication issue on the sidelines. That is something that I think speaks to Ohio State's resilience and also their ability to get what they want when they want it. It's been a question of toughness for Ohio State in this game over the years. It's been a question of, does the run game win the game? And Ohio State did it but then we have to talk about this. They set up the run by passing the football. And it was something we talked about all week, was Ohio State doesn't have to go slam the ball halfback dive up the middle to win the rushing battle. They can spread the defense out. They can hit guys like Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith on the outside. Brandon Innes scores a touchdown in this game. Bo Jackson was excellent in this game. He was one of our top stars. I believe he was the top player to receive a star for our 11 Warriors 3-star selections. But Ohio State in this game ends up throwing for 233. They run for 186. They held Michigan to 100 rushing yards in this game, and they had over 100 in the first half. So I think that was just all something that speaks to the bigger narrative of this game for me about getting what you want when you want it, and I think that's going to set up Ohio State well for this postseason run.
Yeah, the interesting thing was a lot of people wanted the fast start for this game. The first play of the game, they try to throw a bomb to Carnell Tate, and it ends. The Michigan DB made a phenomenal breakup at the last moment to prevent that from being a completion. And then the next play, Sayin throws an interception on, frankly, an ill-advised target to, I believe it was Jeremiah Smith. So in that moment, they could have said, okay, let's go back to the run and let's settle down Sayin and not put as much pressure on him. But they kept a very balanced approach, I think. And that's really what you could talk all the time about the run setting up the pass or when that's not going to work, using the pass to set up the run. the end of the day, it's really going to come down to balanced play calling if you want to win a football game, regardless of how you get there. And I think they managed that well. I talked about on our staff earlier in the week how the very formative moment in my life as an Ohio State fan was watching that 2006 game of the century and all of the different big plays that happened in that game. That's kind of always been the theme with me in the rivalry, is that the team that ends up making the more big plays in the game typically ends up winning. And that was especially the case even in all of Michigan's wins in the recent seasons, is it just felt like they were getting bigger, longer plays for points than what Ohio State was able to generate themselves. Ohio State finally got the big plays back in this game. And that 2006 game, my favorite play of the whole game, and go figure because I'm wearing the Ted Ginn jersey, was second and short, second and inches. Troy Smith has one of the best play action fakes I've ever seen. They've got like all blocking personnel on the field except for Ginn out wide. He kind of hides the ball below his butt cheek and then brings it back out.
I can still see his head, the head bob.
He sold it.
I always remember about that play fake.
Sold it so perfectly and hit him over the top. And that play, in terms of my own approach to wanting to how I see plays called, you take care of business on first down. You set up second and 3, 2, 1, whatever, second and short. At that point, you can basically do anything. And if you've kept the defense honest in terms of committing to stopping the run so that you don't get an easy reset on downs, which they had done on earlier drives in the game to that point before they threw the touchdown pass to Carnell Tate in this game, Michigan was in a position where they said, we have to sell out to stop the run so that they don't get a fresh set of downs and they can just keep chunking us to death. They show the play action. They throw the bomb to Tate. And Tate is, probably one of the easiest throws Saiyans had to make all year, snow notwithstanding. He was wide open. And that just confirmed everything I've ever believed about wanting to run play action on second and short because the bomb is always going to be there. That was my favorite moment of the game by far, more than a 20-play drive that ends in a field goal. But to each their own, you know what I'm saying?
No, that was a beautiful pass from Julian Sand, something that he's been elite at all year, right? The passes downfield, and that's why it was so important for Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith to be available in this game so that Ohio State could push the ball down the field, and it also opened up Ohio State's ability to run the ball, because that play action pass, which ended up being Ohio State's third touchdown of the game, was the last score for Ohio State before that 20-play drive that goes 81 yards, 12 minutes, ends in a field goal. It was that play action pass that I think opens up a lot of Ohio State's ability to run the ball, because Michigan is so aware that Ohio State can take the top off the defense despite the snow, despite the wind, which should give Ohio State fans confidence as Ohio State prepares for this game in Indianapolis, where there's going to be no weather involved at all. It's going to be a comfortable 72 degrees in Lucas Oil Stadium against an Indiana team that they've been able to be picked apart a little bit by explosive plays specifically. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that has been one of ESPN. Bill Connolly is one of my favorite authors on that website, one of my favorite national columnists and contributors. He had written an article as of a couple of weeks ago that if Indiana is going to get beat or get got, as he put it, it's going to be by explosive plays. Guess where Ohio State excels on offense? It's explosive plays over the top, Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. So it was an encouraging sign to see Ohio State get back to business on that after Carnell Tate had been out for 3 weeks. Let me just do one last read through. We'll get out of here on this. As everyone in Columbus and everyone watching this episode at Buckeye Nation far and wide is celebrating the first Ohio State win over Michigan since 2019. The final score, 27-9. Ohio State outgained Michigan 419 to 163. They outpassed Michigan 233 to 63. They outran Michigan 186 to 100. They had 22 first downs to Michigan's 9. They converted on 10 of 17 third downs to Michigan's 1 of 9. They ran 73 plays to Michigan's 42 total plays in this game. Ohio State averaged 5.7 on those plays, and Michigan averaged 3.9. It was as dominant a performance as I can remember over Michigan in a 27-9 game. We're not talking about 62-39 in 2018. That was certainly going to be one of the most memorable finals in this series of great games. But Ohio State, when they needed to be at their best, they were. They come away with a victory, setting them up to play against Indiana next week in the Big Ten championship game. But that's going to do it for the latest episode of 11 Warriors Live. There's going to be plenty of coverage on YouTube this week. We have dubcasts that are going to be available. I think Dan, Andy, and I are going to do some press coverages live from those press conferences as we prepare for what will be another big game for the Buckeyes, a 1-2 matchup, their best matchup of the year along with Texas. But now we obviously have the foresight, or I guess the hindsight, to understand what Texas has become. There's no question, though, that Indiana is one of the best teams in college football this season, so it should be a great and entertaining game. As always, want to give a shout out to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio, always in your corner from game day to work day. They support businesses in Central Ohio like 11 Warriors, so give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. Also got the link right here for our Order Restored shirts. We have those on sale right now through Monday with our Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales. But yes, it's been a great episode talking to you, George, about an Ohio State win. I have been Chase Brown, joined by George Eisner, and we will talk to you soon, folks. Take care.